The stars looked different from this far out. Lieutenant Jack Miller stood at the viewport of the U.S. horizon, watching the unfamiliar patterns of light against the black. Humanity had pushed further into space than ever before, and now, in the year 2157, they were about to make history. Lieutenant Miller to the bridge. Captain Diane Freeman's voice echoed through the comm system. Repeat, Lieutenant Miller to the bridge immediately. Jack straightened his uniform and took one last look at the stars. Something in the captain's voice told him everything was about to change. When Jack arrived on the bridge, the atmosphere was tense. Officers moved quickly between stations, speaking in hushed voices. On the main screen, a massive ship hung in space. It looked nothing like human design. Sleek and predatory, with an iridescent hull that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. "There you are, Miller," Captain Freeman said. Her usually composed face showed signs of strain. 10 minutes ago, that ship appeared on our scanners. They're hailing us in perfect English. They call themselves the Valyrians. Jack's heart raced, but his face remained calm. First contact. After all these years, they're requesting a representative to board their vessel. Freeman continued. Someone with diplomatic experience. She paused. I'm sending you. Jack nodded. Before joining the Horizon, he had served as a Marine in 2 planetary conflicts, then worked 3 years in the diplomatic corps. His file noted his exceptional calm under pressure, a trait that had saved his life more than once. Why me, Captain? He asked. Freeman's eyes narrowed. Intelligence just sent through preliminary data on the Valyrians. They're reptilian, evolved from apex predators. And she hesitated. All reports suggest they use fear as a weapon. Psychological intimidation before physical force. We need someone who won't break. Officers around the bridge exchanged nervous glances. Jack simply nodded again. You leave in 30 minutes. Report to Shuttle Bay 3 for final briefing. As Jack left the bridge, Commander Pete Alvarez fell into step beside him. They had trained together years ago and remained close friends despite their different career paths. Jack, this is crazy, Pete whispered. We know nothing about these aliens. You're really going over there alone. Jack shrugged. Someone has to. Pete shook his head. I've seen you walk into gunfire without flinching, but this is different. We got reports coming in from the science team. These Valyrians have conquered 12 systems. 12, and most surrendered without a fight. How is that possible? Jack asked as they entered the elevator. Fear, Pete said simply. They somehow make their enemies so afraid that they give up before the fighting starts. No one knows exactly how they do it. The elevator doors opened to reveal Shuttle Bay 3. Medical officers waited to give Jack final inoculations against potential alien pathogens. Security personnel stood ready with his equipment. Just promise me one thing, Pete said, gripping Jack's shoulder. If things go south, you give the signal and we come in hot. No heroics. Jack smiled. When have I ever been heroic? Pete snorted. Only every damn day I've known you. 30 minutes later, Jack sat alone in a small shuttle approaching the Valyrian vessel. It grew larger in his viewport, dwarfing the horizon. The surface seemed to pulse with internal light, like something alive rather than constructed. His comm unit crackled. Lieutenant Miller, this is Captain Freeman. Final communication before you enter their communication field. Remember your training, remember who you represent, and remember we're standing by. Understood, Captain, Jack replied calmly. As his shuttle was pulled into what appeared to be a docking bay, Jack took a deep breath. The shuttle settled onto the alien deck with a soft thud. The door hissed open, revealing a tall, sleek figure waiting for him. The Valyrian stood at least 7 feet tall, with iridescent scales and vertical pupils and amber eyes. Female, Jack thought, based on the briefing materials. She wore what looked like ceremonial armor and carried no visible weapons. I am Celia, Chief Interrogator, she said, her voice surprising Jack with its musical quality. You will come with me, human. Your assessment begins now. Jack stepped forward, unafraid. First contact had begun. Jack followed Xalia through corridors that seemed to breathe. The walls pulsed with a faint glow that changed color as they walked. The air felt thick, carrying strange smells that made his nose twitch. He noticed small vents in the walls releasing mist at regular intervals. They entered a circular room with a single table and 2 chairs in the center. The room was bare except for a dark mirror covering one wall. Jack knew an observation window when he saw one. "Sit," Xalia ordered, pointing to one of the chairs. Jack sat down without argument. He folded his hands on the table and waited. Xalia circled him slowly, her claws clicking against the hard floor. Her tail swished back and forth in a rhythm that seemed designed to hypnotize. "Your species is new to us," she said. "Young, primitive, yet you've expanded quickly." She stopped behind him, leaning close to his ear. Too quickly, perhaps. Jack felt her breath on his neck, but didn't flinch. "We're explorers by nature," he said simply. Xalia moved to the chair across from him and sat down. Her amber eyes studied him. "Most species show signs of fear by now," she observed. "Increased heart rate, perspiration, dilated pupils. You show none of these." Jack shrugged. "I'm a guest on your ship. Should I be afraid?" Xalia's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of sharp teeth. It might have been a smile. "Yes, human. You should be." The lights in the room dimmed. The temperature dropped suddenly. Jack felt goosebumps rise on his arms, but he kept his expression neutral. "Your planet is called Earth," Xalia said. Her voice seemed to come from all directions now. "Rich in resources, strategically positioned, valuable." The dark mirror on the wall lit up, showing an image of Earth from space. Beautiful, blue, and peaceful. "Your civilization has existed for mere moments in cosmic time," Xalia continued. "You've barely learned to leave your cradle." The image changed. Earth burning. Cities in ruins. Oceans boiling away. "This is one possible future," Xalia whispered. "One of many." Jack watched the scenes of destruction but remained still. He'd seen similar tactics before in hostage negotiations. Show the worst outcome. Create despair. Break the will. The air in the room filled with a subtle scent. Jack recognized it as his body's stress response triggered artificially. The chair beneath him vibrated at a frequency designed to create unease. The temperature continued to fall. Xalia leaned forward. 12 worlds have faced the choice you now face, submission or extinction. All chose wisely. Jack met her gaze. "And what choice is that exactly?" "The Valyrian Protectorate offers security in exchange for obedience. Your people may continue their lives under our guidance. Resources will be shared. Knowledge will be exchanged. Your military will stand down." The images on the screen shifted to show peaceful scenes of aliens working alongside Valyrians. Happy faces. Prosperity. "And if we decline?" The screen returned to images of destruction. Jack nodded slowly, as if considering. "Interesting proposal." Xalia tilted her head, her scales shimmering in the low light. "You still show no fear, human." Jack smiled slightly. "Should I be screaming and begging?" Xalia hissed, a sound like escaping steam. She pressed a button on the table. The room suddenly filled with loud, discordant sounds at a pitch that made Jack's teeth hurt. The lights flashed in patterns designed to trigger seizures in most species. Jack closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. He waited for the assault to end. When it did, Xalia was standing over him. "Most break at this point," she said softly. "They plead for mercy. They offer anything to make it stop." Jack rolled his shoulders to release tension. "Is there water available? I'm a bit thirsty." Xalia stared at him. For the first time, her composure slipped. Confusion flickered across her reptilian features. "You are unusual," she said finally. "So I've been told," Jack replied. Xalia pressed another button. A glass of water appeared from a compartment in the table. As Jack reached for it, she grabbed his wrist. Her scales were cool and dry against his skin. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jack looked into her alien eyes and smiled. "Why would I be?" Zelia pulled her hand away from Jack's wrist and stepped back. She touched a small device on her neck, speaking in a series of clicks and hisses, her native language. Jack sat quietly, sipping the water she had provided. It tasted slightly metallic but refreshing. Behind the dark mirror, 6 Valyrians watched. They formed the High Council, the ruling body of the Valyrian Empire. All wore elaborate armor that signified their rank and accomplishments. "This is unexpected," said Drex, the eldest council member. His scales had faded to a pale gray with age. "The human shows resistance to all standard fear protocols." "Celia has never failed before," said Krell, the military commander. His scarred face showed the battles he had survived. "Perhaps she is losing her touch. Or perhaps this human is different," said Mira, the youngest council member. Her bright green scales marked her as a rare mutation among their kind. "We should study him further." On a large screen, they watched Jack's vital signs. His heart rate remained steady. His brain waves showed alertness but no panic. His body temperature was normal for a human. "Send in the memories," ordered Drex. Inside the interrogation room, Celia returned to her seat. She pressed another button on the table. A thin mist filled the air. "Let me tell you a story, human," she said, "so you understand what you face." The mist formed shapes, creating 3-dimensional images around them. Jack saw a younger Xalia standing before a group of Valyrian officials. "I was once like you," Xalia said as they watched. "Young, confident, I believed I could face anything without fear." The images showed Celia entering a chamber similar to the one they sat in now. An alien creature waited there, tall, with 4 arms and skin that glowed from within. "The Luminary were the 6th species we encountered," Zelia continued. "Powerful telepaths. They believed they could resist us." Young Zelia in the memory sat across from the Luminary. The alien's skin brightened as it attempted to enter her mind. "They tried to use fear against me," Zelia said. "They showed me my own death in 1,000 different ways." The memory showed Celia remaining calm, just as Jack was doing now. The Luminary's light dimmed as it failed to frighten her. "But I had been trained since hatching to master fear," Zelia said with pride. "I turned their own tactics against them." The memory shifted to show Xalia standing over the now terrified Luminary, who cowered on the floor. "1 week later, their world joined our protectorate without a single shot fired." The mist dispersed, and the memories faded. Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive," he said. "You conquered them with fear alone." 12 worlds, Xalia reminded him. "All now serve the protectorate. All now understand the proper order of things." Jack leaned forward slightly. "And what is the proper order?" "The strong protect the weak," Celia said. "The weak obey the strong. Fear ensures respect. Respect ensures peace." "Is that what you learned as a child?" Jack asked. Xalia's eyes narrowed. "I was not a child. I was a hatchling. And yes, this is the foundation of our society." Behind the mirror, the council members exchanged glances. "He asks questions instead of begging," Mira noted. "He shows curiosity, not terror." "Increase the pressure," Krell demanded. "Break him." Drex raised a hand. "Wait. Let us see how far this unusual resistance goes." In the interrogation room, Celia stood again. She circled the table slowly. "You have not answered my question, human," she said. "Why do you not fear me? Do you not understand what I can do?" Jack set down his empty water glass. "I understand perfectly." "Then explain your calm," she pressed. "No species has ever faced these techniques without breaking." Jack smiled slightly. "Maybe that says more about you than it does about me." Zelia hissed, showing her teeth. For the first time, Real anger flashed in her eyes. She pressed a button on her wrist device. The room plunged into total darkness. The temperature dropped further, now well below freezing. Jack could see his breath in the air when emergency lights activated with a blood-red glow. "Now," Zelia whispered, her voice coming from everywhere at once. "Now you will feel fear." In the freezing darkness, Jack sat still. Frost began to form on his uniform. His breath came out in clouds that glowed red in the emergency lights. He could no longer see Zelia, but he could hear her moving around him, her claws clicking softly on the floor. "Cold," Jack said conversationally. "Reminds me of winter camping in Minnesota. My dad used to take me when I was 10. A low hiss came from behind him. Jack didn't turn. "You're trying too hard," he added. "Fear works best when it's subtle." The lights suddenly came back on, blindingly bright. The temperature shot up, becoming unbearably hot within seconds. Sweat broke out on Jack's forehead, but his expression remained calm. Zelia stood before him, her scales changing color rapidly, a sign of agitation. 6 hours, she said, her voice tight. 6 hours of our most advanced techniques, and you sit there talking about camping. Jack shrugged. "It's a nice memory." Behind the mirror, the council watched with growing concern. "This is unprecedented," Drex muttered. "He should have broken hours ago." "Perhaps humans are physiologically different," suggested Mira. "Their brain chemistry." "No," interrupted Krell. "Their scientists and diplomats on the other ship have shown normal fear responses to our initial contact. This one is unique." In the interrogation room, Zelia slammed her hands on the table. The metal surface dented under her strength. "What are you?" she demanded. "Some kind of military experiment? A mind-altered soldier?" Jack laughed softly. "Just a regular human, I'm afraid." "You are not afraid," Zelia shouted. "That is the problem. Why aren't you afraid, human?" The question hung in the air between them. Jack studied Zelia's face, seeing genuine confusion there. He decided to answer honestly. "Ma'am, I worked retail on Black Friday for 6 years before joining the military," he said. "Then I survived 2 wars and raised teenage triplets as a single father after my wife died. Your fear tactics are honestly kind of cute compared to that." Zelia blinked slowly, her vertical pupils widening. "Black Friday," she repeated, confused. "Shopping holiday," Jack explained. "Imagine thousands of humans fighting over discounted items after waiting all night in the cold. I once saw 2 grandmothers get into a fistfight over a toaster. Now that was scary." Zelia stared at him. Jack could almost see her mind working, trying to process his words. "And these triplets?" she asked. 3 children, born at the same time," Jack said. He smiled slightly. 3 teenage girls, each with their own personality, all going through puberty simultaneously. Trust me, nothing in the universe is more terrifying. Behind the mirror, the council members exchanged glances. "He is making jokes," said Mira, fascinated. "In a situation designed to create maximum terror." "Scan his brain again," ordered Drex. "He must be using some technology to suppress fear." "All scans show he is unaugmented," replied a technician. "This is his natural state." In the interrogation room, Zelia slowly sat down across from Jack. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. "You speak of your offspring with pride?" she asked. Jack nodded. "They're wonderful. Challenging, but wonderful. I have pictures if you're interested." Zelia tilted her head. "You offer to show me images of your young while being interrogated. Why not?" Jack asked. "We've been sitting here for 6 hours. Might as well make conversation." Zelia studied him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a strange sound, like metal scraping on stone, but unmistakably a laugh. "You are unlike any species we have encountered," she said finally. "I must report this to the council." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You're young, the triplets. Did they survive to adulthood?" Jack smiled. They did. All three are serving on different starships now, following in their old dad's footsteps. Zelia nodded slowly. I would like to hear more about them, she said, then left the room. Behind the mirror, the council sat in stunned silence. What just happened? Asked Krell. I believe, said Mira quietly, that we may have finally met our match. Jack was left alone in the room for nearly an hour. He used the time to stretch his legs and examine his surroundings more carefully. The walls seemed to be made of a living material that pulsed gently. The air was warmer now, almost comfortable. On the U.S. horizon, Captain Freeman paced the bridge. Any word from Lieutenant Miller? She asked for the 10th time. No, Captain, replied the communications officer. The Valyrian ship is blocking all signals. It's been 7 hours, said Pete, concern clear in his voice. We should prepare a rescue team. Freeman shook her head. Not yet. We follow protocol. Jack has 24 hours before we consider him in danger. Back on the Valyrian ship, the council chamber was in chaos. Voices rose as the 6 members argued among themselves. This changes nothing, insisted Krell, pounding his fist on the table. One unusual human doesn't alter our plans. It changes everything, countered Mira. If one human can resist our methods, others may be able to as well. We should study him further, suggested a scientist named Lorne. Learn what makes him different. Or we could simply destroy their ship now, said Krell. Show our power directly. Drex raised his hand for silence. We will try one more approach, he decided. Zelia will use the mind probe. Zelia, who had been standing quietly at the side of the room, looked up in surprise. The mind probe is dangerous, she said. It could kill him. Then we will know humans can die, said Krell coldly. Zelia returned to the interrogation room where Jack waited. This time, she carried a small silver device. We're trying something new, Jack asked, eyeing the device. Zelia nodded. This will allow me to see your memories directly, she explained, to understand what makes you, you. Jack considered this. Will it hurt? It could, Zelia admitted. It could also kill you. Jack smiled slightly. Well, at least you're honest. Zelia placed the device on the table between them. It requires physical contact, she said, extending her hand. Jack looked at her scaled hand, then slowly reached out his own. Their fingers touched, then clasped. The device hummed to life. Zelia gasped as images flooded her mind. She saw Earth through Jack's eyes, its blue skies, green forests, crowded cities. She felt rain on his face, tasted his mother's apple pie, heard music that made his heart soar. Then came the harder memories. Jack as a young man, working long hours in a store while angry humans shouted at him over trivial matters. Jack in military uniform, watching friends die in battle. Jack holding his wife's hand as she slowly slipped away from an incurable disease. And then the triplets. 3 tiny babies that grew into curious children, and then strong-willed teenagers. Zelia felt Jack's exhaustion as he worked to support them, his worry when they were sick, his pride when they succeeded, his love that never wavered. Behind the mirror, the council watched in silence as tears, a sight never before seen, rolled down Zelia's face. What is happening? Whispered Krell. She is experiencing his emotions, said Mira. His life. In the room, Zelia pulled her hand away, breaking the connection. She stared at Jack with new eyes. You have suffered, she said softly. Lost loved ones. Faced death. Yet you continue. Jack nodded. That's what humans do. But how? Zelia asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. How do you face such pain without breaking? Jack thought for a moment. We have a saying. This too shall pass. Nothing lasts forever. Not pain, not grief, not hardship, but also not joy or love. So we try to hold on to the good things while they last, and endure the bad things knowing they'll end. Zelia considered his words. And you use humor as a defense. Jack smiled. Laughter helps. So does having someone to talk to. Sharing the burden. Even with an enemy. Zelia asked. Jack looked into her eyes. Are we enemies? I thought we were just getting to know each other. For the first time, Zelia smiled. A real smile, not a show of teeth meant to intimidate. Perhaps, she said, we are. Over the next 3 days, Jack remained on the Valyrian ship. His quarters had been upgraded from a cell to a comfortable room. Each day, Zelia came to speak with him. Their conversations were no longer interrogations, but exchanges of information and stories. Tell me about Earth's history, Zelia asked on the second day. They sat in a garden area of the ship, surrounded by alien plants that moved slowly as if breathing. It's long and often violent, Jack admitted. We've had countless wars, plagues, disasters. We nearly destroy ourselves more than once. Yet you survived, Zelia noted. How? Jack picked up a small stone and turned it in his hands. By working together, eventually. By learning from our mistakes, though that took a long time. Zelia watched him closely. The council believes your kind too dangerous to be allowed freedom. Jack looked up at her. And what do you believe? Zelia didn't answer directly. Your ship. The officers there are concerned for you. They're my friends, Jack said. My family away from family. Even your captain. Jack smiled. Diane Freeman is tough but fair. She's probably plotting a rescue mission right now, even though I don't need rescuing. Zelia tilted her head. You consider yourself safe here. Am I not? Jack asked. Again, Zelia didn't answer. On the U.S. horizon, Captain Freeman was indeed planning a rescue operation. It's been 3 days, she told her officers in the briefing room. No communication, no sign of Lieutenant Miller. The Valyrians haven't made any aggressive moves, pointed out the science officer. That could mean negotiations are going well. Or it could mean Jack is already dead, said Pete grimly. We need to get him out. Freeman nodded. Prepare a stealth shuttle. We move at 600 tomorrow. Back on the Valyrian ship, the council meeting had grown heated. The human shows no fear even after 3 days, reported Lorne, the scientist. Our usual methods have failed completely. What has Galia learned? Demanded Drex. Much about human culture and history, Lorne replied. But she reports that the human called Jack Miller is not unique. He claims many humans share his resistance to fear tactics. Impossible, declared Krell. No species can evolve without fear as a motivator. They still feel fear, corrected Mira. They simply respond to it differently. They use humor, community support, and something they call hope to overcome it. Hope, repeated Krell with disgust. What is this concept? The belief that things will improve, explained Mira. That suffering is temporary. A delusion, scoffed Krell. Perhaps, said Drex thoughtfully, or perhaps a powerful evolutionary advantage. In her private quarters, Zelia reviewed the recordings of her conversations with Jack. Something had changed inside her. For the first time in her life, she questioned the Valyrian way. When she went to meet Jack for their daily talk, she found him looking out a viewport at the stars. Your ship is moving, he observed without turning around. We're heading away from the horizon. Zelia stepped beside him. Yes, the council has ordered your ship to be left behind, while we take you to our homeworld for further study. Jack turned to face her. So I am a prisoner. You always were, Zelia said quietly. Jack nodded. I know. But I think you're a prisoner too, in a way. Zelia blinked in surprise. What do you mean? Your entire society is built on fear, Jack explained. You're trapped by it as much as those you conquer. Zelia hissed softly. You understand nothing of our ways. Don't I? Jack asked. I've seen how you look at your superiors, Zelia. You fear them, just as the species you conquer fear you. It's a chain of fear with everyone trapped in it, and humans have something better. Zelia challenged. We have freedom, Jack said simply. Freedom to feel fear, but choose courage anyway. Freedom to fail, but try again. Freedom to lose everything, but still hope. Zelia stared at him for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised them both. Teach me. Zelia stood before the High Council, her posture straight and proud despite the tension in the chamber. The 6 council members looked down at her from their raised platform. You have spent much time with the human, said Drex. What have you learned that can help us bring Earth under our protection? Zelia took a deep breath. I have learned that humans cannot be conquered through fear. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Krell leaned forward, his scales darkening with anger. Explain, he demanded. Humans know fear, Zelia said. They feel it deeply, but they have developed ways to move forward despite it. They call it courage. They support each other. They use humor to lessen fear's grip. They hope. These are weaknesses, declared Krell, not strengths. I believe that too, Zelia admitted. But I have seen the human's memories. I have felt what he feels. Their approach has allowed them to survive disasters that should have destroyed them. It has helped them advance quickly as a species. You sound as if you admire them, accused Krell. Zelia met his gaze steadily. I do. The council chamber erupted in angry hisses and shouts. Drex raised his hand for silence. What do you suggest we do? He asked Zelia. Form an alliance with Earth, she said. Not a conquest. A true partnership between our species. Impossible, roared Krell, standing now. We do not ally with lesser beings. We protect them. We rule them. That is our way. Perhaps our way is wrong, Zelia said quietly. The room fell silent. No Valyrian had ever spoken such words before. Meanwhile, Jack sat in his quarters, wondering about Zelia. Their conversations over the past days had changed something in both of them. He had seen glimpses of a different Valyrian than the fearsome interrogator who first greeted him. The door to his quarters slid open. 2 large Valyrian guards entered. The council will see you now, one said. Jack nodded and followed them without resistance. They led him through winding corridors to a massive chamber with high ceilings. Zelia stood in the center, facing 6 older Valyrians on a raised platform. She turned as Jack entered, her eyes warning him to be careful. Human, said Drex from his central position. You have caused much trouble aboard our vessel. I'm sorry to hear that, Jack replied calmly. It wasn't my intention. Zelia tells us you cannot be ruled through fear, continued Drex. Is this true of all humans or only you? Jack considered his answer carefully. All humans feel fear, he said. But many of us have learned to face it rather than be controlled by it. Impossible, muttered Krell. May I ask why this matters? Jack inquired. Why is fear so important to your people? Fear brings order, explained Drex. Fear prevents chaos. Our entire civilization is built upon the proper understanding of fear's role in maintaining peace. And yet you're not at peace, Jack observed. You're constantly seeking new worlds to conquer, new species to frighten into submission. Krell stood up, his claws extended. You dare question our ways? I'm trying to understand them, Jack replied. Where I come from, the strongest societies are built on trust, not fear. Lies, hissed Krell. We have studied your history. You have had endless wars, conflicts, chaos. Yes, agreed Jack. We're far from perfect, but we learn and grow. Each generation tries to be better than the last. Enough, declared Drex. We did not bring you here for philosophy. The Council has made its decision. Earth will join the Protectorate, willingly or not. And if we refuse? Jack asked. Then we will demonstrate our power, said Krell with satisfaction. Beginning with the destruction of your ship, the Horizon. No. Zelia's voice rang out. She stepped forward. This is wrong. I have seen inside this human's mind. There is another way. Krell's eyes narrowed. You have been compromised, Zelia. Step back. I have seen the truth, she insisted. Fear is not the only path to strength. Guards, ordered Krell. Take Xalia to reconditioning. Then prepare the human for dissection. His biology may yield useful information. As the guards moved toward them, Xalia looked at Jack. In that moment, they both knew what had to happen next. As the guards moved toward them, Xalia touched a small device on her wrist. The lights in the council chamber flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, Jack felt Xalia grab his arm. "This way," she whispered. "Quickly." They slipped through a side door as emergency lights came on. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. "What did you do?" Jack asked as they ran down a narrow corridor. "I disabled the main power system," Xalia explained. "It will reset in 10 minutes. We must reach the shuttle bay before then." Behind them, they could hear shouting and the sound of claws on metal as guards gave chase. "Why are you helping me?" Jack asked as they turned a corner. "Because you showed me there's more than one way to live," Xalia replied. "I cannot return to what I was." They reached a small hangar containing several shuttlecraft. Xalia quickly entered commands into a control panel. "This will take you back to your ship," she said, pointing to a sleek vessel. "I've programmed the coordinates." "Come with me," Jack said. Xalia hesitated. "My people would never accept me now." "My might," Jack countered. "Earth has a long history of offering asylum to those seeking freedom." Before Xalia could respond, a blast hit the wall near them. Krell stood in the doorway, holding a weapon. "Traitor," he hissed at Xalia. "You betray everything we stand for." "I stand for something better now," Xalia replied, pushing Jack toward the shuttle. "Go." But Jack didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward, facing Krell directly. "Your way is dying," Jack said calmly. "Fear can only control people for so long before they find the courage to resist." "Silence, human." Krell raised his weapon. Jack continued to walk forward, showing no fear. "You can kill me, but you can't kill what I represent. Earth will never bow to fear. And I think some of your own people are ready for change too." As if to prove his point, Mira suddenly appeared behind Krell with several other Valyrians. "Lower your weapon, Krell," she ordered. "The young ones are refusing orders. Half the ship now stands with Xalia." Krell turned, his scales paling with shock. "Impossible." "They have heard the humans' words," Mira said. "They have seen Xalia's courage. They want a different future." "This is madness," Krell hissed. "Drex will never allow it." "Drex is old," said Mira. "His time is ending. Change is coming, with or without you." Krell looked from Mira to Jack to Xalia, seeing his world collapse around him. With a roar of rage, he fired his weapon at Jack. Xalia moved faster than Jack thought possible, pushing him aside. The blast caught her in the shoulder. She fell, wounded but alive. Before Krell could fire again, Mira and the others subdued him. Jack knelt beside Xalia. "Why did you do that?" Xalia looked up at him, pain in her eyes, but also something new, hope. "To prove to myself that there are things worth facing fear for." Mira approached them. "The situation is stabilizing. Many younger Valyrians have been questioning our ways for some time. Your presence was the spark that ignited change." At that moment, a new alarm sounded. "Incoming vessel," announced a voice over the ship's communication system. Jack smiled. That would be the horizon. Captain Freeman isn't one to leave crew behind. Hours later, Jack stood on the bridge of the U.S. horizon beside Captain Freeman. On the view screen, Mira and Xalia represented the new Valyrian leadership. "We propose a formal alliance between our peoples," Mira said, "not based on fear or domination, but on mutual respect and exchange of knowledge." Freeman looked at Jack. "Your assessment, Lieutenant." "I believe it's genuine," Jack replied. "And historic." Freeman nodded. "Then we accept and will relay your proposal to Earth authorities." As the call ended, Freeman turned to Jack. "That was quite a diplomatic mission, Miller. Care to tell me how you managed to start a revolution on an alien ship? Jack smiled. By not being afraid, Captain. Across space on the Valyrian vessel, Salia looked out at the stars, her wound healing and her mind filled with possibilities. Why did you help me? She had asked Jack before he left. His answer stayed with her. For the same reason you helped me. Because sometimes courage is contagious and hope is worth fighting for. For the first time in her life, Celia felt truly free.